So my name is Dr. Aaron Brinen. I'm an assistant professor of clinical psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And as we were talking about earlier, I'm excited to join the faculty here. Dr. Heckers was able to connect me with Robin as soon as I got here so I could start partnering with NAMI on the local level. I moved down here to start working alongside the rest of the team in the psychosis program. I've been really fortunate in my career. I developed a version of cognitive therapy for psychosis that we call recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. And I was able to develop it with a man named Dr. Aaron Beck, who is the person who developed cognitive behavioral therapy originally. And so I'm really fortunate to get a chance to continue to partner with him. And so this is the work that's been so exciting throughout all of my life. And so I came down to Vanderbilt and packed up my whole family in the middle of a pandemic to come down and start partnering with the team here, including just like really brilliant psychologists like Julia Sheffield, who is a young psychologist. And so that's how I ended up down here to start building out more of the psychosocial treatments, and getting to partner with Dr. Heckers is just like an absolute pleasure. And we get along and get quite animated when we think things out. I really feel fortunate that Robin brought me in to have this talk today. And we came up with this idea of when is it more, right? So I think one of the things that oftentimes happens is, particularly in the way the world is in the middle of a pandemic, we start kind of getting this idea of, anytime, and listen, I've got 2 kids. So anytime, something happens, we get very anxious and we very immediately jump to an explanation that is sort of pathology based. And so we thought, what if we could come up with an idea of talking about like, when is it more? And when do we need to be concerned? And how do we understand some of these other things along the way? So it's a 2-parter. So if you really liked it today, I've got good news. I'm back in 2 weeks. And if you really don't like today, I've got bad news. I'm back in 2 weeks. So that's sort of what we've got going on. So I want to start with this thing, parenting, right? So if you're a parent, if you've got a young person, and I'm using the term in the widest of sense, essentially big people who care a lot about little people who drive us pretty nutty at times. Like, so essentially like the broad base of parenting. And so that could be parents, that could be foster parents, that could be aunts or uncles, grandparents, however you sort of, however it is. But essentially, if you've got a young person who you care about and you're paying attention to, that's what we're talking about. So parenting is not for the faint of heart. And I think it gets way, way, way worse, especially when we get into teens and tweens. I think it also gets really, really rewarding when we get into teens and tweens as well. So it's sort of this, double-edged sword. It's like this yin and yang. And I always think about this, and in every parent that I have the opportunity to serve, I really think about this quite intently, is the amount of stress on a parent. And I would say, let's say everything goes perfectly well, right? Your kid is born, goes to college, goes off and becomes a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker. That's stressful. And then I think about like, what if there's something that like we don't quite understand? The stress is so palpable. And so when I get a chance to sit with a parent and talk through what's been going on, and giving them the opportunity to maybe sort of feel at ease. And more so when I supervise or I train providers and really talk to them, the first thing I say is, please remember that this parent is terrified. And I mean, and I'm not saying that people are weak. I'm saying like, they might be going through the most scary moment of their life. And I want you to think about the 2 reasons that's so. One, the number one goal that we have as parents is to protect our children. It's sort of baked into the cake when we have a kid. And so every decision we make is designed with protecting our child in mind frequently. It doesn't always mean that we're successful in protecting our child or things are going to turn out well. But if we start with the idea that 99% of the parents that we're going to serve are trying desperately to get a PhD in psychology in the 5 seconds between something going wrong and them needing to know what to do. And so the amount of stress that that person is under cannot be underestimated. And then, listen, our parents want to ensure that we get the best outcomes. I talked to my mom on the drive home today. She's still worrying. I'm not like her little boy anymore, but like she still wants to make sure everything turns out okay, right? So with the whole kids going back to school, whether it's live or virtual, she like texts me every morning to see if things were going well. I'm like, Mom, I'm a doctor at Vanderbilt. I got this. And she's like, still texted me the next morning, right? Like, so, but that's what we do as parents. And so I wanted to sort of start from this place of going, however you're feeling, whatever's going on, it's coming off, like I said, 99% of the time, it's coming from a place of trying to make sure your child is okay. That being said, teens and tweens do a great job of freaking us out. Right? Like they do stuff that can really scare us. And many of their behaviors that they can do are one, difficult to understand. And two, oftentimes can produce a lot of fear. They're really good at that idea. And I don't think that us all being locked into the house with our teens and tweens, or like, listen, extend it into like maybe your 20-something-year-olds or whatever, I don't think that's made any of this better of being locked in a house with our kids. My wife and I have that conversation all the time. We're like, I don't think you're supposed to be locked in the house with your teen for like a year, right? And so we oftentimes think about the things that are happening. I will say that one of the things I want us to sort of think about as we're in this conversation, I'm going to allude to it's a great book. And the thing that makes it even better is that the author reads the book on Audible. So if you like Audible, it's one of the best readings I've had on Audible. But it's a book called Untangled. I'll actually show the book on the screen. And it's a wonderful book. It happens to be a book about raising teenage girls. So it's very specific. But I think that the author makes a really good point, because a lot of times people think of teens and they talk about the teenage years as this time of sort of, it's sort of like nature's way of like insanity, right? That like teenage minds are like naturally just like completely, chemically, problematic and all this stuff. And she draws on some really interesting research where one, it says that's not true. And she actually helps us understand, she helps the reader understand what a child is trying to do in the number of years he or she, well, in this book, it's she has to do it. And it's pretty complicated. And so I'm going to talk about that idea because it gives us a chance of understanding what are our teens and tweens trying to do during this time, and how better to understand it. So what I want us to start thinking about is what we're looking at a clinical problem? Is it something that's developmental? I think one of the things that really shook me to the core when I heard it and also made me tear up and become quite overwhelmed was that she points out that teenagers, and she's really obviously talking about teenage girls, that they need to break away from their family, find a new tribe, figure out who they are, get a career, support themselves, and deal with a body that is essentially revolting on its own time, on its own time schedule. And then she said, like, pretty much they have about 6 years to do it. It took me 5 years to get my doctorate, and I was still freaked out when it was over, so I had to go do a postdoc. I mean, all psychologists have to do a postdoc. So just to put that into context, think about what you were doing 5 years ago. It really sort of captures how much pressure is on the young folks that we love, and in those times. And it really sort of humbled me. And then you start going, oh, some of that stuff that they do that drives you a little batty, some of that stuff might start making a little bit of sense. So the teenage years, right? There's a lot going on. It's a really, really stressful time. And again, that book was written before COVID. So this is not a book about teenagedom in COVID. It is written after everybody was on smartphones. So you've got that. It's up to date enough that it's actually a useful book. But if you think about this idea, teenagers are trying to give up childhood, differentiate from their family, right? Really sort of break away and create this whole new identity for themselves and figure out who they are. Listen, I'm not a teenager and I just changed cities that I live in. So I find that freaked me out, and I'm like a pretty grown up person on occasion. I might not be wearing shoes during this presentation, but that's just between us. So they're trying to do that, develop their identity, become independent from the people that they have to do, learn how to use this new body, as I was saying, and really think about the changes that are going on in their body. For boys, if they don't grow fast enough, they oftentimes feel smaller than, and that could be really difficult. For young women, if they grow too fast, that can create a lot of problems. And the worst part is it's not like they didn't order their body change on Amazon before like the Prime schedule changed or something like that. Like they get no choice over it. It's going to happen at the worst time, and they're going to feel probably the worst about it. And it is a really, and yet we all do it, by the way. So like anybody who was wondering, like we all did it, we all got through, probably as best as anybody else is going to be doing. But as we're talking about these things that people are doing in the way that the young people that we love are reacting, is it developmental? Is it that they're just trying to pull away? And yet at the same time, they're really trying to hold on to this nice security that they have. It's very overwhelming. So I cannot suggest that book enough. If you have a teenage girl, that book is amazing. And so it's a really easy read. It's very approachable. And I get no royalties from it, by the way. So like my name is not Lisa D'Amour, so I get no money from it. And then, like I said, I just finished listening to it on Audible, and it was really helpful to hear her describe it in that way. So this is what we're trying to deal with. And so then we're trying to figure out, with like all of the scary stuff going on, is it pathological? Is it a problem that the young person has? Or is it just sort of them being like a normal teenager, right? Is it sort of some of the normal things that they have to do? Because in this world that we live in, we've gotten so good at capturing pathology before it gets too far that sometimes we start labeling normal human experiences as pathological. And so we don't want to go in that route, because we can sort of start to impede that natural progress, right? And so that's a really important thing. I don't know if anybody's ever heard descriptions. Have you ever seen like a little kid who finds a cocoon and they want to help the butterfly out of the cocoon, so they help by like opening it up a little bit? When you interfere with that normal change, the butterfly actually does worse in the long run. And so there's ways that we can sort of help and support the young person, and not sort of jump on top of it. And so that's going to be sort of the focus of what we're going to be talking about. Like I said, if at any point anybody has a question or says, I don't know about that, feel free to sort of jump in and start talking about those things. So here's sort of a big list of sort of some normal human experiences, and I'm going to go through these each. So there's a whole bunch of emotions and feelings and things like that are naturally baked into the human experience, right? So there's things like anxiety. We think that anxiety might be one of the most basic of emotions for any creature. And so anxiety is our mind's way of letting us know that we're about to die. And actually the emotion that you're feeling is fear. And anxiety is actually a fear toward the future. And so it's sort of the way that humans took fear, which like, you know, rats and bunny rabbits feel, and we like made it even better. So we projected into the future, which is what we're talking about when we're thinking about anxiety. But anxiety is sort of normal. I mean, I don't know how many people on this video got anxious when I just described what teenagers have to go through, and none of us are teenagers anymore. I was anxious. The body thing really got me anxious again, I'll be honest. So, so along those lines, there's sort of like some natural things that we can do, to sort of prepare for that anxiety, right? So there's things like worry. We know that about 4 out of 10 people worry every day. And what we're talking about with worry is it's this preparation for a negative future. And so there's a way that we kind of worry in our minds works to sort of say, oh, well, if I worry, then I'll be on top of things, right? And so then we worry and we feel more threatened, because worry is just thinking about what's the worst thing that's going to happen. So you feel more threatened. And so when you feel threatened, you go, oh, if I worry, then I can get on top of it. And it gets like worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Now, when it happens like on occasion, like when it happens, like, you know, obviously we all have days when we worry, that's fine. And so understanding that worry is just something that's naturally we're going to see happening. If we see it getting more, then we'll start talking about like when is more. Avoidance, you know, being anxious and not wanting to do something, that's not pathological, right? Feeling anxious about a situation and not wanting to go do it, sure. You know, because what happens is avoidance works in the short run. We know when I feel really nervous that people are going to make fun of me at this party and I don't go to the party, I feel better in the short run. It also sort of reinforces the not going to the party thing, but I feel better in the short run. Doesn't make going to the party easier, but it feels better. And so that's, again, just a normal human experience that people do. And we all do it on some level or another. Rituals, right? We all do rituals, right? So anybody who's ever known anybody, I know that when I was waiting for my response from to see what internship site I got to, I would sort of hit to check my email, I would hit it 3 times in a row and then wait. And then I'd hit it 3 times in a row and I'd wait. I hit it 3 times in a row and then I'd wait. And then I'd go on to whatever I had to do. And that's a ritual, right? Maybe there's a way that you like to open up the doorknob, or a way that you like to make your, you know, toast in the morning, right? And we can all have those rituals. And there's a way in which sort of rituals naturally can sort of put the bad feelings away that we do. We have normal rituals, and then there's sort of those things that start feeling a little bit more like, you know, you seem to do that a lot and it's getting a little bit more like maybe that's not as good. But there are ways that sort of teens come up with dealing with anxiety. And if left to their own, many kids sort of get through that anxiety and they kind of figure a better way of doing it, right? And like a large number of kids sort of move through that. Same thing for sadness. You know, sadness isn't depression. Sadness is sadness. Sadness is our mind's way of letting us know that we've lost something that's important to us, right? Or that we've lost something. It's funny, I was just talking with somebody because they were really struggling with this idea of sadness. And I reminded them of the movie Inside Out. If anybody ever saw that movie, if you haven't, it's a great movie. And so in the movie Inside Out, the whole idea is that the girl keeps trying to push off sadness and control sadness. And in doing that, everything becomes problematic. And so in the end, when they embrace sadness, it shows that sadness allows happiness to be more accentuated. So it's sort of this sort of comparing side by side. And so it's okay for us to feel sad. It's okay for us to feel like really sad and really down at times. And again, those are going to be times that you're going to be seeing kids, you know, when the different tribes, you know, that the kids are in start fighting, or an old friend sort of rebuffs them. That's okay. And it can be pretty bad. And it can be pretty sad. but they're okay. And they might isolate for a little while. They might become irritable as a result of it, because they're going to sort of take the anger that they have at their friend and sort of, we all get it, which is always appreciated. And yet it's still okay. Same thing for elation, right? There's a way in which the normal human mood range, it can be quite broad, and we can have some really big ups and we can have some really big downs. But in the teenage years, I mean, and again, I would almost say, like, looking back, if anybody remembers when you were a teenager and like, something happened and you were like through the moon and you couldn't sleep and you were going to get all this stuff done, and you all of a sudden put all of the stamps on every letter. So that way, maybe, I know NSYNC would come and visit your high school, or I forget what the group was that when I was in middle school. It definitely wasn't NSYNC. I can't remember who it was. And then you want to stay up and you want to talk on your phone with your friend and you want to watch a movie. And then so you stay up for like a day, or you stay up overnight, and then you get really, really wacky and stuff like that. We know that elation can happen like that, that very, big piece. Do we want to keep track of it? Sure. But at times there's also these ways that people are going to feel really, really up, and we can help them start. There are things we can do to help, right? So again, just because somebody's anxious, sad, or elated doesn't mean that we're not going to sort of figure out how do we help that young person, and just sort of keep track of it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a part of our normal human experience. And people who know me will oftentimes, if I'm working on something that I'm really excited about, it definitely gets sketchy at times. Because I'm just really hyper-focused. But then there's also knowing that the skills of how do you pull back from that really hyper-focused, over-energized experience. Then we get into things like suspiciousness. I think that's something that can really kind of get our hackles up. But what we know is that people are, we walk through the world, and suspiciousness we can think of as sort of the precursor to paranoia. Ironically, I have a lot of friends in the UK, in the United Kingdom, and they're always shocked when I talk about paranoia. You can't talk about the word paranoid here, right? So if I talk to like one of my friends and I'm like, oh, you seem like you're really paranoid right now, they'd be like, why are you doing that to me, Aaron? And I'm like, oh, they're like, okay, Dr. Brinen. And I'm like, no. And so my friends in the UK are like shocked. Paranoid is a part of like the normal vernacular there. It's just another word. It just means that you're really, really suspicious. But we know that suspiciousness is part of the normal human experience. Think about, has anybody here on the phone ever been at work and thought that like your boss hated you and was like, had it in for you? I mean, not my current boss, but other bosses. I don't need everybody to be like, oh, Dr. Heckers, you know what Aaron said, right? If anybody ever thought that like you were at a party and somebody was like talking smack about you, right? Like these are all those ways that, there's a psychologist in the UK named Dan Freeman, and he says it really beautifully. Every day is filled with hundreds of thousands of decisions about whether to trust or whether to not trust another human being. And that's what part of what the human experience is about. And so that suspiciousness, particularly if we're feeling unwell, particularly if we're sort of frustrated, is such a part of the teen experience, right? Whether the teen you love or the tween you love is high drama or like no drama, there's still that quality of wondering why, and even suspiciousness toward us as parents, right? There's definitely times where it's like, well, why do you want to see my phone? Like, why, do you have one of those apps and like all of those things? I'm like, listen, I got a lot of stuff going on in my life. Reading your stupid texts is like lowest on my to-do list. And yet it's funny how suspiciousness can move in there. And when you combine things like suspiciousness with worry, it can start to take away, it can start to get a little bit of a life of its own. Other pieces are things like irritability. I don't think that that's a big surprise. But, anger and irritability, and even irritability when it turns into some action, right? Of yelling or cussing, throwing things, which is not our favorite. Those are things that can happen at that age and can be good learning experiences. But irritability and anger is the sign, is our mind's way of letting us know that somebody else is violating our boundaries, and trying to control us. So things that bring about anger are things like are things that others, when we see others as blocking us, trying to control us, not listening to us. Do all of those things sound like essentially like the tattoos on the inside of the forehead of every teenager ever? And that's not criticism, but that's sort of like the world that they live in. And so when we say, listen, we're not doing that, we're going out on Saturday, we could see irritability. If they're not sleeping well, right, we could see irritability, things like that. And also body image, right? The bodies are changing. And unfortunately, there's a ton of information that our young people are getting about like what to do and things like that. So the internet doesn't make any of our lives better in that way. But body image questions are really normal. And again, just like the butterfly in the cocoon, we don't want to sort of like the more we can sort of help that naturally resolve versus trying to intervene on it. Sometimes it will resolve of its own. Listen, one of my favorite things that I get to do in some of my work sometimes is when I sit back and I go, listen, dude, like we can come up with some good things that might make it helpful, but like what you're describing isn't a problem. And I don't say it in a way that's invalidating, but I'm like, listen, everybody keeps saying that you're like, your brain's all broken. I'm like, listen, I think getting a new job can be stressful, or I just think you're kind of a chill dude. And like, and I'm a tire kicker. Like, so anybody who's ever been in therapy with me, like I ask a lot of, we explore things, we do a lot of experiments, we figure stuff out. And then, once I kick every tire, a lot of times I go like, am I missing something? And I'll summarize everything back to them. And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, I don't like, it might just be that sometimes you're sad, and being sad is okay. And then now my new intervention will be sending them to go watch Inside Out, but it's like, that's okay too. So let's look at these things, the normal experiences that we really, really wish they weren't, that we wish weren't, right? And so like, I think one of the things to think about is things like experimentation. And there's like lots of forms of experimentation. Started typing them out, had a panic attack and stopped typing. So, things like obviously alcohol, drugs. It doesn't mean that we need to be passive observers, and we can let people know, let our young people know sort of where we stand and what our thoughts are. And yet we know that young folks are going to experiment with alcohol, experiment with they may experiment with cannabis, they may experiment with more. I know that, and I think everybody on this phone call is probably thinking the same thing. Taking a reefer madness approach probably is a good way to get them to go smoke more and not tell you and try to hide more. On the same side, I'm also not like, driving my kid to a dispensary anytime soon. Like, so there's sort of, I think there's a good middle ground in there. I think when we're talking about experimentation, also recognizing that sometimes experiments go well, sometimes experiments go badly. And so when experiments go well, listen, they're kind of a knucklehead, as long as they're not driving, and not pregnant, like it's sort of like, okay, your head's going to hurt in the morning, and talking about those things and giving some instruction around alcohol. I think that can be really helpful. If it goes badly, let's say it gets a little overboard one night, and having that conversation, going like, what are your thoughts about this? Where are you at with all this stuff? And going, help me understand what happened, and using it as an educational opportunity. If anybody's ever heard the phrase relapse or relapse prevention, it actually comes from a psychologist by the name of Alan Marlatt. Sadly, he left us it was early for me. But he died of pancreatic cancer like 10 years ago, I think. And he's just the sweetest man. And he did all of this research around alcohol use with some other colleagues out in Washington state. And one of the things they found in sort of looking at college students and alcohol use is that if you try to diagnose college students who are drinking alcohol, about 75 to 80% of them would meet the criteria for an alcohol use disorder and probably alcohol dependence, like a huge amount of them, particularly in their first and second years, right? Which of course makes any parent makes my skin crawl. And so what they found is that only about 1% of all of those students, or even less, went on to actually develop any problem at all. And so, one of the things they started doing was developing ways to assess students when they were in college, so that way they didn't send all of them to substance abuse programs who were just sort of like stupid freshmen and sophomores. And so understanding that experimentation is going to happen, and it becomes a good learning opportunity for us to guide future use and responsibility and things like that. And even it, yep. Good.
Brinen, do we have, I mean, with fentanyl and some of the really scary stuff that's out there now, that experimentation, I think, maybe takes on a little more fear for parents when it comes to that stuff. How do you get the point across that, they're going to do stuff, but at the same time, that's pretty scary.
So I think having an open dialogue on it, and part of the open dialogue could be like, listen, I think there's lots of time to, if this is something that you want to try, not fentanyl, but in your life, I think there's time. And I think that I know that now's the time when your brain is developing, and, anytime something's developing, sort of chucking extra stuff in there is probably not the best idea. That being said, I'm also not stupid. And so would I love for you not to? Absolutely. I also, I really am a firm believer in saying whatever's going on, if you're ever in a bad situation, I will pick you up, no questions asked, and you will be totally safe. And listen, the next morning we might have a conversation, but you're not going to get lectured or yelled at. The most important thing is that you end up back in if they're living at your house, back in my house and safe. That's all I care about. We can have a conversation tomorrow, the next morning. You're going to come home, get a glass of water, go to bed. Period, end of conversation. The way that I've oftentimes talked with, when I was in Pennsylvania, I worked at a residential treatment facility for kids with psychiatric disorders, but on the week, to make a little bit extra, during the week, not during weed, to make a little extra money, I would come in and I would do a lot of the drug and alcohol assessments. And I would also sort of do a little bit of coaching and counseling. And so I was a big believer in talking to kids about facts. So if you tell a kid, if you smoke weed, you're going to die, every one of their friends shows up to school on Monday morning. They were, baked as a Pillsbury Doughboy, and they were fine on Monday morning. Sorry if that was inappropriate. But what we can say is this, listen, the one thing I can say for certain about whatever you're going to be getting is we don't know what's in it. And that's a fact. I'm sure the guy you get your weed from is great. That's fine. We don't know what's in it. He doesn't know what's in it. And so that's the first thing. And that's cannabis also, or weed or whatever. And so if you want to get into other stuff, first of all, the stuff you're smoking today is about I think they say it's 70% or even more potent than what was smoked in the 80s and the 90s. And so understanding that what you're smoking is a very different thing than, if your parents smoked or if your grandparents smoked, it's not the same thing. When you get into other stuff like fentanyl, like heroin and stuff like that, could you be fine? Sure. On the other hand, you don't know what's in it. And we know that these are the things where it could be a one and done. So I get the allure and the draw, but just to think about the biggest problem with fentanyl isn't fentanyl. The biggest problem with fentanyl is that people get patches that are tainted with something else, and that's what kills them. And so I'm just and I just say, listen, I'm just talking facts. And so I also recognize I have no control over you. which also, by the way, on some level is sort of getting them to not be like, why are you trying to control me? Right. Going, I don't, you know, and so I hope you can think about sort of the future that we dream together. And so it gets it out of this boogeyman reefer madness approach. And it gets it into just sort of facts and getting the kid to think with you. And so even this is some of the stuff is from the book that I suggested. You know, when you see this stuff on the news, it's a really good opportunity to go like, gosh, that's really scary. You know, I wonder what it's like for those kids' parents. And even going, you know, it's just, that's the problem, is that we don't know what's in any of those things. And so just sort of getting the kid to think about that, you know, kids, there's a great point of going, kids start seeing behind the curtain. If you remember The Great and Powerful Oz, like they start seeing that we're all weird and we all got lots of problems with us. And teenagers get really good at noticing those, but they also get really good at noticing like all of society's problems, right? So they think that, you know, they think that we've got problems. They also think that like the pharmaceutical companies got problems, right? And so that's some of the, you know, some of the things that people start to notice a little bit more. Is that helpful? Do you like, is that useful? Other questions on that?
Yeah.
It's a tough conversation to have. But I think the more we stick to facts versus, you know, when you draw a line in the sand, it gives them something to walk over. And so I think when we're alongside our kids, it's uncomfortable from the desire to keep them safe, right? You know, when they used to walk toward the street, you'd just grab them and pick them up and carry them away. And now we're in this world where we can't do that. We can't pick them up and keep them safe. And I think it aches in just the center of us so horribly. So there's other risk taking that they engage in, right? There's sort of sexual risk taking. There might be self-injury. There could be like going and biking on the side of like Route 65, because that's a route around here, I think. You know, and like so that they can go down and hang out at the Parthenon. And there's like all kinds of stupid things that they do. And some of it is just a part of the experience. If they're doing it all the time, again, we're going to talk about sort of like how to sort of differentiate between problem versus, you know, when it becomes a problem. Sleep deprivation, I mean, that's just sort of like part of the deal. And I think we can get very anxious. I know, I'll tell you, for me, it's like one of my weak spots is when I see sleep deprivation and like not sleeping enough and up at 4 a.m. and, you know, I'm getting up for work and one of them's still awake and I'm like, what are you doing? Nothing good happens at 2 a.m. And I like take my big breaths and I like go outside for a walk, right? Because I listen to Don. And then I'm like, and then I come back in and I go, you know, and then figure out a way to kind of come at it. And I would even say that sort of thinking about suicide and thinking about the end actually is a part of the normal human experience too. One of the ways, you know, it doesn't mean that none of these things are we going to ignore. But, you know, one of the things that suicide, and I spent a lot of time doing, running suicide studies or suicide prevention studies and sometimes sort of looking into it. And one of the things that suicide represents is it's sort of an ultimate form of escape, an ultimate form of avoidance. And so in the sense that of this overwhelm and the sense that nothing's ever going to get better because the young folks that we love, they don't have all these years of experience of going, oh, yeah, things are bad at work, but like tomorrow they'll get better. Or, oh, yeah, your bills were bad this month, but like next month it'll all like work out because there was just this extra credit card bill or any of those things. The young folks that we love, they don't have that history. And there's that sense of like really intense feelings. And that thoughts about suicide can provide a very quick relief of feeling better because it's this image of all of the pain going away. And what we can do is we can help people learn other ways to sort of deal with those feelings. But the more we can get alongside young people, the better it is. The more these experiences that we wish weren't normal experiences, the more we treat them as something that we need to hold on to. That's what teenagers want to pull back the most. When do we not worry? When we are feeling uncomfortable, when we're feeling annoyed by what's going on, and just because they're disagreeing. So like if you're super annoyed or uncomfortable, that's not necessary. And that's not the same as saying don't listen to your gut. But if you're just like the first time, like I just feel really uncomfortable about that, we can step back and use sort of our like wise mind as adults to sort of figure out what we want to do. And so that's when we're not going to sort of jump in with our worrying. So when do we worry, right? So here's the things that we want to pay attention to. And the next time we get together, we're actually going to talk about, we're going to keep track of this for people. And hopefully if you end up watching this at home, please keep track and let us know what you think. But we're going to, we'll talk about ways to help even earlier, but that we don't necessarily need to sort of jump in and sort of start fixing it and taking off things. So when do we worry? When there's a long duration, like, so when it's not going away. And so I would say if a kid has like a panic attack, get some like, you know, a nice cup of chamomile tea, a cookie, go outside, because that's what Don always tells us to do. And just, you know, take a walk and be like, yeah, they suck. Panic attacks are the worst. 80% of people have experienced a panic attack at one time in their life. I've got 3 under my belt now. But just because you have a panic attack, it's just sort of your brain's high alert going on. Same thing for feeling really sad, feeling really, really depressed or things like that. But when the duration is, when it's going on for a long time, that's when we want to start worrying. We want to start going, well, what is it? It could be really low hanging fruit. You know, I've been really fortunate when I came to Vanderbilt is as they were getting me sort of the cases that I usually serve, they were like, can you see these sort of like, you know, some of these other cases that we have that need to be served? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like I didn't move to Tennessee to like sit in my office and decorate. And so they were like, so there are some people who they just go and they meet with somebody and they get a couple nice, you know, skills, sort of readjust stuff in 2 meetings. They're like off and living their life. But when the duration is for a really long time, we're looking like 2 weeks. There's no ups and downs either, right? Which is why we're going to talk about sort of keeping track of it, because I can tell you that I feel like my kids are always in danger. They're not. Like they're like that's not happening. And so when we keep track, we can say, oh yeah, I mean, 2 days a week, maybe, you know, one of my kids gets grouchy, or 1 day a week it feels really down, but all the other days they're either they might be outside, they might be playing video games, they're on the phone with friends, things like that. Intensity, right? That's the other part of it. So part of it is if it's going on for a long time and it's not breaking, we want to sort of start worrying and just start like reaching out and getting some more, increasing the level of help. Intensity, if it's like really, really intense. So that might be anxiety, right? It isn't just that they're anxious, but it's a crippling level that's really, really distressing. That's going to be a time to get help. Same thing. I mean, we just talked about suicidal ideation, right? If all of a sudden there's one thing going, oh, it's not worth it. It's not worth being alive anymore. And we go, okay. And then, you know, do a little bit of a hug, kind of get things going. If the intensity gets super high, we're not going to mess around. We're going to reach out and get other people on the team involved. Obviously, you know, reaching out, getting support from NAMI, getting support from, obviously we're always there at Vanderbilt, or other trusted sources in the area. And anytime we start seeing it impair that sort of normal development, right? So if they're not moving on with their life, if they're not if they're spending a lot of time sort of in their room, not connecting to a new group, they're not differentiating, they're not giving up, and the experiences that we're talking about seem to be getting in the way of that. And then obviously anytime there's like a real danger. So those are the times that we're going to sort of like, our eyes are going to get really big. And that's when we want to start worrying and thinking about what are we going to do? So best thing, now granted, if anybody knows the CBT out there that they love, they know we love our data because that's how we roll. And so we want to find out how often is it happening. Keep track of it. If you want to get some like really good like spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, absolutely do it. If you want to open up like the notes tab on your iPhone, absolutely do it. Like it really, you don't get any points for good graphs. You don't get any points for higher level statistics. The important thing is we want to collect data. Finding out how, yeah.
Do you use any, one of the things we asked Don to do earlier this year was he went and sampled mood journals for us that we found online, different apps that we found. And I wondered if you have used any of those, because we do encourage people to track things and so that they can figure out cycles and then bring that to their therapist.
So I'll be honest, that is like the number one thing people ask me is for like mood journals and thought record journal like apps. And I'll be honest, because most of my work is usually in psychosis and PTSD. The sort of mood journal with depression and stuff like that has never been one that I grab one. So if Don, if you could email me the ones that you liked, I would love to have those under my belt. So the data that we want to look at is how often is it happening, right? So if you're finding, let's take anxiety, because I think that's the one that makes us the least anxious, ironically. So if we're talking about anxiety, like how often is it happening? Are you finding that your teen or tween is anxious, like, every time you see them, just sort of like making a check mark? And are they like super, and the downside is that we're all stuck in the house together. The upside is like, it's a lot of opportunities for data. How long is it happening? So is it that they're anxious for, 5 minutes and then it goes away, but it's happening 20 times a day? Is it that they're getting anxious and they're anxious for like 3 hours, and you knock on their door and they're like, no, I don't want to come out, I'm not feeling well and stuff like that. And how predictable is it? So like, when are these things happening? So if we're thinking about, again, anxiety, is it every time they have to log on and have to turn the camera on their Zoom class? Is it every time they hear the kids outside? Is it every time, so figuring out what are the things that happen around there. You can't tell for certain, but you can gather data. And what data allows us to do is it battles those feelings, right? And it really gives us some real facts. Because one of the things that's going to say is, I just feel like that, like my kid's always anxious or always depressed. And they're going to go, and then what's going to happen is we're going to sort of think, and I go, okay, well, what day, as a clinician, I'll go, oh, what days was he anxious? Every day. But if I ask the kid's like, I don't know what they're talking about. I was like skateboarding on Tuesday, and Friday I was like playing Minecraft all day, and I built this new city that I've been wanting to build for a while. And so we feel like they're always anxious. And so this allows us to sort of gather those data. We can see, on one hand, we could be totally right. On the other hand, wow, it feels like they're like he's always, depressed. But really it's only at these times, but it's the times that their friends aren't available. And so that might be worth something kind of looking into and figuring those things out. And it might be something that we can help with, but it may also be something that a professional can help with as well. Oh, and so by the way, between this week and 2 weeks from now, also if you're watching at home, collect these data. So we, if there's a young person that you're thinking about, and see how easy is that to do.
And I would say, I would encourage, this is for primarily tweens and teens, but if you've been through this with a young adult, that might be helpful just to know what was going on at that time, and maybe you could gain some insight from it.
I want to thank you guys so much for having me tonight, and I'm looking forward to coming back in 2 weeks. It really is important. I mean, I think I know as a parent, and that these are the things that sort of keep us awake at night. And so I just want to thank you guys for making some time for me. I know everybody's really, really busy and has like lots going on, and with the NAMI virtual walk coming up. So I appreciate you guys making some time for me. If I can ever be of any service, please feel free to reach out. That's a website I have below, and it has other resources, other NAMI talks that I've done is actually on that website, recoverwithcbt.com. And I'm super excited to say to NAMI for the first time, this is my first NAMI talk saying this, that I'm Dr. Erin P. Brinen, an assistant professor at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And so it's really great to join the Vanderbilt family. Please, if I could ever be of any service, please feel free to reach out and grab me.